Hey, what's going on, sweaties all over the world? You already know what it is. It's your boy, Mikey Savage 21 or MS21, whatever the heck you want to call me, bringing you another sweaty discussion. And today's sweaty discussion, we're simply going to be talking about Spider-Man and whether or not Spider-Man Far From Home is the best Spider-Man movie yet. All right, so coming out of this movie, I knew one of the questions that was probably going to be asked of me is this the best Spider-Man movie? Because a lot of the critics were hyping it up as the best Spider-Man movie. So what I thought is, okay, let's take a little bit of a retrospective review and look at the past Spider-Man films that we've gotten and then see how this movie stands up. So we'll start with the original Raimi films. Once again, 2004 completely got blown out of the water. We had no idea that this movie was going to be so monumental going forward. Again, X-Men did it first, but because of this, this showed Sony and other companies that these superhero characters can work. And so I know me personally, I grew up with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. So I'm always going to have a little bit of nostalgia and always have a little bit of love for him. But those original Spider-Man films were great. And not only was the first one great, but the second one just was phenomenal. Sometimes I think some of this new generation just doesn't understand how amazing and great Spider-Man 2 was. I mean, it's cool to, to say, oh no, this new iteration is even better. But I tell you what, Spider-Man 2 had something that we had not seen in a long time. We had a sympathetic villain, and not only that, we had a villain understand his motives and methods and also had that turn at the very end to where he gave up his life for the hero he's been ultimately opposing the entire movie. At the time, we hadn't really seen a villain like that, and we would get villains like that later on in the MCU films. But at the time, there were no MCU films. So when this came out, this was a breath of fresh air. And that's why I still feel like this is one of the better films. Now, Spider-Man 3, trying to do too much. I mean, you tried to have Sandman, you tried to have new Green Goblin, and then you did Venom in there. And then, of course, you had the casting of Topher Grace, which I used to defend Topher Grace as Eddie Brock. But now seeing Tom Hardy's version of him, and just going back and rereading the comics, Topher Grace was miscast. He definitely shouldn't have been in the movie. No offense to him. There was nothing threatening about him whatsoever. And then, of course, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but you had the emo dancing. Then again, like I said, you had the rushing of certain characters not being fully fleshed out. Now, the Sandman character is one that I say that should have been the main villain. And I agree that they were trying to pluck at the heartstrings, kind of similar to what they did with the second film, because Sandman was one of those complicated villains that you can get on board with because he wasn't a villain just to be a villain. He had motives, he had motivation. Eddie Brock had no motivation. And you could argue that Harry had motivation to be the new Green Goblin, but not that much. They were just, again, trying to pull at things. Then from there, of course, we got the Ultimate reboot in 2012. We got the Amazing Spider-Man coming out. Loved it. I loved the first one, thought the first one was great. I loved how we got a different villain. We got a more grounded, realistic villain. And what really sold me on that movie was the relationship between Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield, love them. Most relationships do not work in comic book movies, and most times they cannot get us on board with them. This is one of the relationships I feel like they got us on board with. And then, of course, the Amazing Spider-Man 2 furthered that relationship, and then we got to see the ultimate tragedy of that relationship. But speaking of Spider-Man 2, we have another Spider-Man 3 fumble where, again, you have people trying to introduce way too much in a film, trying to cram all of this up just to set up other films, as opposed to taking your time, picking your villains wisely, making sure you flesh them out. Jamie Foxx always puts on an Oscar-worthy performance. I love most of the movies that he is in, if not all of them, but I hated him in Amazing Spider-Man 2. And I know it's not his fault. It's ultimately on to the director, but I don't know what they were going for with Electro, but that whole thing just did not work. If you want to rank the ones that we've gotten so far, of course, Spider-Man 2 stands up at the top, and then I'll put the Amazing Spider-Man, then the original Spider-Man movie, then I put Spider-Man 3 slightly above the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, getting into 2018's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now, I came to the movie late, didn't get a chance to watch it in theaters, but one thing I can honestly say about that movie was this movie tugged at the heartstrings like you would not believe. This movie is wonderful to look at. It is charming. I love the character of Miles Morales and how he's this relatable teen. Once again, I know a lot of people would, point out the fact that, it's culturally significant to see yourself be represented on film, and I can agree with that. It is. and for him to be played to this caliber and to this level and be handled with this much care. And it ultimately shows how much Sony has grown over the years and how they've learned from their past mistakes. And so Miles Morales was great. Peter B. Parker was great. All of the Spider-Mans coming together were great. The overall story was great. To me, was definitely one of the best films of last year. I would dare say it should have been nominated for a Best Picture contender. It definitely deserved the Oscar that it got for Best Animated Picture. Now, in terms of the new Spider-Man films, we have Spider-Man Homecoming, which was the first one. Again, we have Spider-Man being introduced into the MCU and him having his first standalone movie. I liked it. It was cute. It was charming. Again, some of the same things I would say about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I felt like Tom Holland nailed that nerdy perspective of Peter Parker. And I will say that I think this is the best iteration of Peter Parker we have gotten, because to me, Tobey Maguire just seemed like he was too old for the role. Andrew Garfield seemed like he was just too cool to be in that role. But Tom Holland, no offense to him, he looks like a nerd. He pulls off that geeky persona that makes Peter Parker so wonderful and relatable to us nerds. And so Tom Holland was perfect casting. Again, his best friend Jacob Batalon, loved him in the movie as Ned. Thought that they had a really great dynamic. Again, we want to talk about another standout villain. We have Michael Keaton here playing the Vulture, once again giving some depth to these villains, not letting them be one note and letting them just do the same thing over again. We were starting to see that Marvel was really starting to learn from the past and flesh out their villains. Here, we cared about Vulture, and we cared about the relationship that he had with his daughter and with his family, and how he was ultimately just doing this to provide for his family. And then they nailed this whole high school feel, because that's hard to do in a superhero film without coming off as cheesy, and I feel like it nailed it perfectly. Now, what we've all been waiting for, Spider-Man Far From Home. I'm not going to get into any spoilers or anything. If you guys want me to do a spoiler related video, I can do one, but for this sake, I'm going to keep it non-spoiler. Okay. So I saw it this morning, and my thoughts coming out, I really enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. And the first thing I want to start with is the mid-credit scene and the post-credit scene. Everything that everybody has been saying about how the hype is real and how this really sets up the MCU going forward and how this really is going to impact not only Peter Parker but affect the universe as well. That is true. I will honestly say that. I won't go any further than that, but yes, these credit scenes are hype, and they are one of the best parts of the movie. Now, there are some other great things about this movie. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's a bad movie, but there are some things that worked in this movie and some things that didn't work in this movie. One of the things that did work is, once again, Tom Holland is a standout in this role of Peter Parker. He's been doing it for several films now, and I like how this time we got a more emotional depth from Tom Holland. We got hints of the emotional depth in Homecoming, in the whole I Am Spider-Man scene where he has to try to push the debris off of himself. We have similar moments in here throughout the film, and we really get to see Tom Holland stretch his acting chops. And I think the director did a fantastic job bringing that out of Peter Parker. Ned wasn't really used to his full capability like he was in the first film. They had him doing his own little side thing, and to me that was one of the negatives. I understand what they were trying to do, but I felt like that was kind of pointless and worthless. They could have maybe, I don't know, to me that whole thing that he had going on with I can't think of the girl's name, the whole relationship he had going on, didn't buy into it. It didn't take me out of the film, but at the same time it still felt like it was one of the weak points to me. Talking about characters, gotta talk about Zendaya. Zendaya crushed it as MJ, and I am really starting to buy into the relationship of MJ and Peter Parker here. I think that this is something that we can all agree as fans, as all the Spider-Man films have nailed his relationships right. Even as wonky as it was a little bit with Kirsten Dunst and Tobey Maguire, I still felt like there was some genuine care there. Emma Stone crushed it, and of course, Andrew Garfield crushed it. I really bought into the relationship. One of the best Spider-Man relationships we've gotten so far. And Tom Holland now with Zendaya's character are on their way to being that best couple. And so to me, I love Spider-Man Far From Home. And it's definitely a movie I recommend. Again, if I'm gonna talk about things, I can't forget to talk about Jake Gyllenhaal. Standout performance. Jake Gyllenhaal did a fantastic job as playing Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio. And I like the way that they take him in this film. Jake Gyllenhaal has a little bit of that Nightcrawler feel in this, and I really like it. And I also like the relationship between him and Peter Parker and the different dynamics that they have. And one of the other things that I want to spotlight is I love how they had so much love and care for the Iron Man character in this movie, because they really made it a point that the world is missing Iron Man. And then on top of that, we have the lingering question of, is he going to be the next Iron Man? Everyone's looking for the next Iron Man, and those are some big shoes to fill. Peter Parker has to rise to the challenge to try to fill those shoes of Iron Man. So now answering the big question, is Spider-Man Far From Home the best Spider-Man movie yet? I would say no. Spider-Man Far From Home is a great, solid movie. Fantastic movie across the board, but I don't think it is the best film just yet. Spider-Man 2 is still going to be the best Spider-Man film, because not only did you have a great, performance in Tobey Maguire, not only did you have a solid story, not only did you have the waning relationship between him and Kirsten Dunst's character of MJ, and you were buying into that, but you also had a villain that you could connect to, that you could understand, with someone who was grounded and real, similar again to Michael Keaton's Vulture, but I felt like they gave Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2 more love and more care. And so throughout the film, you have these different dynamics, and it's like their stories are playing out throughout the film, and they just happen to collide and meet in the middle because they have something going on that's a common threat between those two. And so I would say Spider-Man Far From Home, to me personally, ranks at number 3. It would be Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, followed by Spider-Man 2, then Spider-Man Far From Home, then Spider-Man Homecoming, followed by The Amazing Spider-Man, then Spider-Man 3, and then The Amazing Spider-Man 2. But ultimately, guys, what do you think? Do you think that Spider-Man Far From Home is the best Spider-Man movie? Also, let me know who is your favorite Spider-Man. But alright, guys, thank you so much for tuning into this video. Make sure if you like the video, you smash that thumbs up button. It helps out the channel immensely. Also, if you like what you see and you want to see more sweaty content like that, make sure you smash the subscribe button and then tap the bell so you'll be notified every time a video comes out. Also, don't forget to share this video with a friend, especially if they want to get in on this debate on whether or not Spider-Man Far From Home is the best Spider-Man film that we have gotten on screen so far. Thank you once again for tuning into this video, and I hope you all have a sweat-tastic day.